What is the strange light that is haunting residents in the north of the Swedish island of Gotland? Swamp gases, ball lightning, illusions, UFOs, or ghosts? Despite hundreds, perhaps thousands, of sightings since the light was first reported over 100 years ago, and intensive investigations by serious investigators like UFO Sweden, no one has been able to answer that question. This is the story of the Martebo Light. Martebo is a small town on the island of Gotland. Gotland is Sweden's largest island, located in the Baltic Sea, about 100 kilometers from the Swedish mainland. The nature of Gotland is very different from the rest of Sweden. This is partly due to the island's isolated location and the barren limestone bedrock, which has created the conditions for a very special species flora. In the northeastern part of the island is Martebo, which was the island's largest lake until it was drained in the 19th century. Today the area consists partly of marshland, and it is in connection with these that the observations of the light take place. In particular at a desolate forest road 2 kilometers north of the Martebo bog. Yes, it is usually on this forest road that observations are made during dark fall or spring nights. This is also what a journalist from one of the country's largest morning newspapers did on a spring night in 2002, which he then described in his article in the same newspaper in June of that year. After a few hours of waiting in the dark forest, another car drives up. It stops behind the journalist's car and some loud teenagers get out. The journalist and his accompanying friend tell the teenagers to be quiet, but they reply that it doesn't matter whether they are quiet or not. If the light comes, it comes. The young people sit down next to the journalist at the side of the road. After this, they don't have to wait long before one of them calls out. When they look over, one of the teenagers points to a faint red pulsating light next to the road about 70 meters ahead, a few meters above the ground. The light slowly approaches and gets wider and bigger, and after a short while it is the size of a football. The journalist describes it as unpleasantly similar to that which in folklore is called a lantern man. When the light is about 50 meters away, it suddenly moves towards the forest, turns redder and goes out. The journalist writes that none of the people present dared to say anything. They hardly dared to breathe. What was it that they had seen? The first time the light is believed to have been observed was in 1922 by the parents and uncle of Ingmar Gothwig, who grew up near the bog and was interviewed many times about the light. It was one evening in March 1922 that his parents and uncle saw the light on the bog. Since there was snow on the ground, his father and uncle went to track the lantern man the next day. Lantern man is the name given in folklore to the lights or flares in nature that were often associated with a creature carrying a lantern. For example, one could have the more general idea that the flare was the soul of a dead who had not been laid to rest in the grave. But in some parts of Sweden it was believed that it was a physical being who, with a lantern in hand, guarded unjustly buried money or someone who had moved boundary markers without permission. The father and uncle returned home without having found any tracks in the snow where they'd seen the light the night before. Since then, Ingmar claimed to have seen the light hundreds of times. Once his mother had come to meet him and his sister after they had been away playing. As soon as they met, the mother shouted for them to get out of the way because there was a bicycle behind them. At the same moment, the children saw their shadows being thrown in front of them. When they stepped aside and turned around, they saw what looked like a large sun hanging in the air before disappearing into thin air. As a child, Ingmar also encountered it while cycling along the road. "I usually say I'm friends with the light," Ingmar told a reporter in the 1990s. "I was about 3 or 4 years old the first time I saw it, and the last time was last year." The observations are numerous and often similar. The distance between observers and the light ranges from about 20 to 70 meters. The light floats in the air towards the observers. Sometimes the light stops at the side of the road, sometimes it travels across. The light crossing the road seems to be especially true if the observers are not driving. Over the years, excited young people have tried to interact with the light. Running or driving at high speed towards it always causes it to go out, even for observers further back. The same thing happens when turning on the car's headlights. Also common to many observations are the descriptions of what happens just before the light becomes visible. First, the surrounding environment suddenly becomes quiet. Many describe it as a cover for the ears. Some claim that dogs get worried when the light appears, others that bicycle chains jump and compasses stop working. When the light appears from a distance, many describe a sense of peace and tranquility. However, several people who have come close to the light describe something completely different: a feeling of malice, or pure evil. Whatever the mysterious light is, one of the most enduring theories about the Martebo Light is of a paranormal kind, rather than a scientific, and stems from a chilly autumn evening at the end of the 19th century. In a cottage near the forest road, a farmer named Knut Starry and his 5-year-old son have just gone to bed when there is a knock on the door. Surprised at the late hour, someone comes to visit. He gets out of bed and goes to the door. Soon there is another knock, this time louder and more determined than before. Now there is also a voice commanding him to open. Knut, who now realizes that his steps on the creaking floor have revealed him, calls back and asks who it is that is knocking, and gets the answer that it is the Crown's soldiers who are looking for shelter for the night. Knut carefully opens the door and peers out. Sure enough, there is a group of uniformed men standing there. He opens the door and invites them to enter. The newly awakened 5-year-old son stands in the middle of the cottage floor and stares wide-eyed at the many men who enter one by one. Without a word, Knut goes and lifts a bottle from a shelf on the inner wall. He pulls off the cork, and the characteristically muffled sound draws everyone's eyes to the bottle. Before Knut has determined which of the men who has the highest rank and should be given the first drink, the closest standing soldier grabs the bottle. He raises it and toasts. After taking a good swig, he gives it back and encourages Knut to return the gesture. Knut does what he believes is expected and then passes the bottle to the next soldier. Again, he has to drink. It then continues in the same way, and before he reaches halfway around the men, he feels the intoxication hit with full force. After that, he has given all of the men a toast. He sits down on his bed. After this, he does not remember anything. He wakes up as the bright light of dawn penetrates the leaky walls of the cottage. The rays pierce his eyes like fine needles, aggravating the headache he has already recalled. As the memories of yesterday's late-night visit return, it strikes him that the cottage is dead silent. He lifts the arm with which he has covered his eyes and looks around. His gaze wanders from one corner to another and then back again. It is empty. Where are the soldiers? But before he has time to think about the answer to that question, he remembers his little son. He throws himself out of bed and rushes over to the bed where the little one usually sleeps with his blonde hair. His heart stops when he realizes that the boy's bed is empty. Though the headache hits his forehead like a sledgehammer, he opens the farmhouse door and steps out into the yard outside. Not even bothered by the bright daylight burning his eyes, he begins to search in ever-widening circles around the farmhouse. Although more and more people eventually joins the search, there is never again any sign of the boy or the soldiers. Some believe that the Martebo Light is the lantern of Knut, who continues his search after the boy, even after his own death. For those who don't believe that it is the spirit of Knut Star that is the Martebo Light, there have been many attempts to explain it scientifically. Methane, The Martebo Light is often likened to a flare, and flares or lanterns are usually explained by the fact that it is swamp gas or mine gas that creates the light phenomena that can sometimes be observed in nature. The phenomenon occurs when gases produced by the decay of organic matter self-ignite. These gases, often methane, are highly flammable and can form small floating flames in the air. In the 1930s and 1940s, flares were common in Sweden. They could be seen in many places, especially near marshland. Gotland consists mostly of limestone. Limestone is a porous rock where bubbles and pockets can easily form. These bubbles and pockets may contain organic material, such as plant residues or animal carcasses. This organic material can decompose and form gases, including methane. Perhaps the Martebo Light is simply gas. Another explanation is that the Martebo Light is a so-called ball lightning. It is a ball of light that can occur in connection with thunderstorms. It can be anything from a tennis ball to a soccer ball in size, and it can be in different colors. Ball lightning can move freely in the air or slide along conductive objects. Scientists are not entirely sure how they occur, but they believe it is a form of electrical discharge. One theory is that ball lightning occurs when lightning strikes a damp surface. The lightning can then charge the air around the surface with electricity. This electricity can then condense into water droplets, which can form a spherical ball. A ball lightning often disappears with a bang. The phenomenon can last from 1 second to several minutes. Although plausible, the theory of the Martebo Light being a ball lightning weakens when taking into account the many observations compared to the extreme rarity of a ball lightning occurring. The most accepted explanation for the Martebo Light is that it is actually something as mundane as car headlights. Standing along the road where most observations take place, you can see car lights that appear to be much closer than they actually are. This is because the light travels in a straight line and is not bent by the distance. In the dark, it is even more difficult to determine the distance to a light because there are no other reference points. The organization UFO Sweden has found that it is difficult to judge the distance to lights visible along the road. This is because the light from cars and other light sources scatters into the air as it travels. Sometimes it may appear that the light is only a few hundred meters away, when in fact it is several kilometers away. This is because the tall trees on both sides of the road concentrate the light in a kind of tunnel. This effect can vary from evening to evening depending on the weather. If it is foggy or cloudy, the effect is stronger as the light spreads out more. Headlights, ball lightning, or methane. These can perhaps rationalize many observations. But a lot of people, especially those who have observed the Martebo Light many times, reject these explanations because they fail to elucidate many of the things that occur before, during, and after that the phenomenon appears. They do not provide an answer to the silence that many people report just before the light shows itself, and none of them explain the sense of harmony and stillness that many people experience when they observe the light from a distance. Nor do they explain why the light seems to react when someone tries to approach it. But most of all, they do not explain the most remarkable observation of the light ever to be made, one that occurred on an autumn evening in 1991, and which the witness, who is also named Ingmar, describes in detail in an episode of his podcast. Ingmar says he grew up on Gotland and that he has experienced the light many times. At one point in his life, he describes it as one of his friend's favorite pastimes to drive out to Martebo on weekends to watch the light. In 1991, he is 19 years old and has just moved away from home. This particular weekend, his friend Johan asks if they can take his Volvo 740 to Martebo. Johan has just bought the car but hasn't had time to get a driver's license himself, so until he does, he lets others drive. A silver Volvo 740 leaves the flickering lights of Visby behind. Ingmar is in the driver's seat and Johan in the passenger seat. In the back seat are Ingmar's girlfriend Tina and a friend of hers. Once on the road, they stop with the car facing the place where the light usually appears. Ingmar says that when he visits the light, He always starts by getting out of the car to get the right feeling, to hear the forest and the wind. But if there is no light right away, he waits in the car to keep warm. Back in the car, he puts the stereo on low, and he and his friends start to talk about something else for a while. After sitting there for about an hour, Ingmar and his friends decide to give up and go back to Visby again. Ingmar starts the car and turns it around to drive back the way they came. The Volvo is an automatic transmission, and just as he finishes turning the car, he briefly keeps his foot on the brake pedal. That's when he sees something shining in the rearview mirror. He puts the car in neutral and taps the brake again, and sure enough, the mirror lights up again. He tries again. Shortly after he presses the brake pedal, that light, which looks exactly like the Martebo Light, flashes again. So far, he's been watching it all through the rearview mirror, and to get a better look, he opens the driver's door and puts his left leg out. He leans out and hits the brake twice. Now he sees it not only through the mirror, but with his own eyes how the light seems to respond to him by blinking twice. Everyone in the car has now become aware of what is happening and is staring in amazement out the back window. Ingmar says that everyone in the car is flooded with questions. This is so unlike anything they have ever heard of. Someone must be joking with them. However, Ingmar continues the game, as he calls it. First he presses the brake pedal and then he waits for a response. Not all presses get a response, and not exactly the same number either. Sometimes he presses 3 times and gets a response once, but it usually responds. Ingmar estimates that he is doing this for a few minutes. This is something completely different from the Martebo Light he is used to. There is nothing harmonious about it but more aggressive. He himself explains this feeling by saying that it may be because it flashes back. But what happens next is something that has unfolded in detail and in slow motion in his mind over the years since that autumn evening in 1991. He is still sitting with the car door open and his left foot in the gravel. His eyes have returned to the rear view mirror as it provides a more comfortable position. He sits there engrossed in pressing the brake pedal and watches the light respond to him while the others in the car continue to look out the back window in fascination. But suddenly the light stops responding. Nothing happens for several seconds, and the only sound is the pumping of the brake pedal. The only thing that is now visible behind the car is the gravel road, which lights up with a red glow when he presses the brake. As he ponders why he is no longer getting a response when it recently responded to him so aggressively, the others in the car yell at him to drive. They scream at each other for all they are worth and throw themselves forward over their knees, all 3 of them, like on an airplane about to crash. Ingmar is flooded with adrenaline, but comes to his senses quite quickly and puts the gearbox in drive and presses the gas. He doesn't even have time to retract his left leg and starts rolling with the door open and his leg outside. His friend Johan is sitting next to him, holding his arms over his head, and the whole car is full of screaming and crying. After just a few seconds, the entire inside of the car is illuminated by a dazzling white light. Ingmar, who is focused on driving, has to turn the rear view mirror to a different angle so he can see the dark road in front of him as the light seems to hover just above the tailgate. He accelerates as much as he can, but the light remains and the car is still fully illuminated by a 1,000-watt lamp. He estimates that the car is doing 70 kilometers per hour on the gravel road, and the light continues to follow. After several hundred meters of high speed, screaming and crying and the bright white glow, the light finally disappears. He continues driving while the other 3 cry for several minutes. Even Johan cries loudly, something he never thought he would experience. It's not something you do as a cool guy at the age of 19 with 2 girls in the backseat. Ingmar remembers that he reacted very strongly to this, and he understood that something truly horrifying, beyond the fact that the light had followed them, had happened. But at that point he didn't know what it was. When they reach the paved roads, the journey continues in silence. Nobody cries anymore, but nobody says anything either. Ingmar turns into a gas station that is closed for the night. Everyone gets out and lights their cigarettes. What the hell happened? Ingmar finally says, because none of the others want to start the slightest explanation. The others had obviously experienced something he hadn't, and they didn't seem to have seen the light following them because they were huddled together. He wanted answers. He was heading towards you. It is his girlfriend Tina who says this. All three of them then agree and have the same detailed explanation of what happened. Just behind the car, they had seen a figure with a bright face without any contours coming from the forest and moving towards Ingmar and his open door. All three had seen this figure, and this is why they had reacted so strongly. They had only dimly perceived what Ingmar told them about the car ride and the bright light following them. Ingmar himself thought this was a bit strange, because even if they had their eyes closed, the light had been so bright that it could not have been missed. Or maybe their experience of the shape had taken over and the light had become secondary. The next day, Ingmar tried to talk to his girlfriend about what happened, but she seemed very reluctant to talk about it. It was as if he wanted to bring up something deeply traumatic with her. He also didn't want to nag, so he decided to give her some time, but he wasn't going to let it go. He felt that this had to be sorted out. When he tried to talk to Johan about it, he got exactly the same feeling, but in his case he thought it could also be because he had been crying in the car. 2 weeks later, Ingmar tried to bring it up again at a party, but both his girlfriend Tina and his friend Johan said that they barely remembered what happened. Ingmar became angry with them and wondered if they were making fun of him, but they denied doing this, and Ingmar later states that they really didn't seem to remember. When he tried one last time some months later, they had no trace of what happened that night. In all of the years that have gone by since 1991, Ingmar has wondered what really happened. Today he has lost contact with all three who were in the car with him, and despite attempts to contact them, he has not succeeded. The memory continues to haunt him, and the question will probably never be answered. Was the figure with the bright face without any contours the ghost of Newt Starr, an extraterrestrial, or an early description of something that later would be called the Slender Man? The Martebo Light continues to mock everyone who ever observes it. And who knows? Maybe it will mock you too if you one time stand by the forest road on an autumn night on that rocky island in the Baltic Sea.